From Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio, this is All Access Med School Admissions, and I'm your host, Christian Essman. Hello again, everybody. Thank you for sharing some of your time with me today. It continues to be a really busy time of year right now in admissions as we're all screening and interviewing. There was a lot of action at our building this week, the health education campus. Our neighbors at the Cleveland Clinic hosted some of their events here for their annual Medical Innovation Summit. People from all over the United States and the world come in town for this. It's kind of a big deal. They had all kinds of speakers from healthcare, obviously, but also from Microsoft, WAS, Groupon, among others. The summit is always capped off with the Cleveland Clinic's top 10 medical innovations for the year, which is always really fascinating. I'll put a link to them, those top 10 innovations, in my show notes. I think you'll find it kind of cool too. In a couple weeks, many med school administrators, including myself, will be heading to the AAMC's annual national meeting called Lead, Serve, Learn, which will be in Phoenix, Arizona. This is an enormous conference that hosts all kinds of topics and sessions for medical school deans to residency directors, curricular affairs, student affairs, admissions, basically everything under the medical school sun. In conjunction with this meeting, the AAMC always hosts a minority student medical career fair. This year, the career fair will be taking place on Saturday, November 9th at the Phoenix Convention Center. The great thing is that it's free, and there will be over 100 medical school and health profession recruiters there. Almost all the schools that you've heard on this podcast will be there, including Case Western. So be sure to stop by their tables and tell them you listened to their podcast episode on All Access. I'm sure they'll be very flattered to hear that. There's a quick and easy registration process, so I'll put that link information in the show notes. So if you're in the Phoenix area, I strongly encourage you to check this out because it really is a unique opportunity. As you saw from the title of this episode, today we're going to be hearing all about the Washington State University Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine. You're going to learn that they primarily accept only those applicants from the state of Washington. Now, if you're thinking, oh man, I'm not from Washington, so this really isn't for me, I'm out of here. I'll tell you, wait, don't hit pause, don't hit stop, stick around. I promise you that when we get to the part of the conversation, when we begin discussing what Washington State is looking for in their applicants, you will also see that this information and the rest of the info that we cover after that point is quite applicable to almost any prospective applicant to medical school. So hang in there. Also, we spent some time at the end of the conversation talking about how holistic review works in the admissions process. If you've been listening to previous episodes, you've heard holistic review come up a lot. And since my guest has been a trained holistic review facilitator, I thought that she would be the perfect person to talk about this in a little more detail. I think you're going to find that part really interesting as well. Okay, since we're here today to learn more about the medical school at Washington State, let me give you a little brief description about who they are. The Washington State University Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine is a community-based medical school affiliated with Washington's land-grant institution and is located in Spokane, Washington. Spokane is located on the eastern edge of the state of Washington, about 20 miles from the border with Idaho. This is a relatively new medical school that was founded in 2015, and their inaugural class is now in its third year. They have 4 regional WSU campuses in Spokane, Everett, the Tri-Cities, and Vancouver, Washington. These cities are located in about each quadrant of the state, and we get into how the medical school uses these 4 campus sites during our conversation. The vision for WSU is inspiring people to solve problems in challenging healthcare environments. The Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine mission is to be a unique resource for the state of Washington, converging on solutions to the healthcare triple aim of improving the patient experience of care, keeping populations healthy, and decreasing the cost of care, all while improving the work life of healthcare providers. Through a culture based on valuing the individual, they are resourceful, agile, inventive, and generous in serving the people of the state and beyond to develop healthier populations through research, innovation, interprofessional education, and patient-centered care. They have created an infrastructure for healthcare education and delivery that is bold, audacious, and visionary. Those three words were spoken by the late Washington State University President Elson S. Floyd, for whom the College of Medicine is named, which captures the essence of his idea for a second public MD granting medical school in the state. His goal was benevolent: to expand access to healthcare in medically underserved areas of Washington. The Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine is a public medical school and primarily accepts only applicants with connections to the state of Washington who meet their criteria or definition of, quote, resident student. Applicants must meet 4 requirements to receive a secondary application, and we get into the specifics of this during our conversation with the Dean of Admissions. You'll also find links to their resident criteria in the show notes. For the entering class of 2019, the medical school received 1,554 applications, and they interviewed 344 applicants for a class size of 80. 54% of their entering class were comprised of women. 14% self-identified as underrepresented in medicine, which includes enrolled tribal members. 26% grew up in a rural county. 26 of 39 counties in Washington are represented in the student body, by the way. And 37.5% are first-generation college graduates. 55% come from low SES or socioeconomic status backgrounds. And 6.5% have served in the military, and 59% are non-traditional, meaning 25 years old or older. And this diverse class is a reflection of their holistic review admissions process and the aim to serve all of Washington's communities. Today, my special admissions guest is Dr. Leila Harrison. I think, like me, Dr. Harrison is enthusiastic about medical school admissions, and you're going to hear this enthusiasm ooze out throughout our conversation. She was really fun to talk with, and I think you're going to enjoy listening to her. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Harrison is the Interim Senior Associate Dean for Student Affairs, Admissions, and Recruitment. She oversees efforts in these areas as well as pathways and inclusion. She has 17 years of experience in medical school admissions across 3 public medical schools nationally. She has held leadership roles at the regional and national levels for the AAMC in both the southern and western regions through the Committee on Admissions and Enrollment Management Work Group within the Group on Student Affairs. She also served as an AAMC Holistic Review Facilitator, training other medical schools' admissions committees on how to include holistic review in their admissions processes for 4 years. She leads the participation for Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine within the National AAMC Situational Judgment Test. Side note here, you may remember that Dr. Christina Grabkowski from the UAB episode number 10 is also involved in the SJT study. Finally, Dr. Harrison is also involved in many, many College of Medicine and WSU committees. So she has a wealth of experience, and you're going to hear that come through in our conversation. So with that, let's take you right into my conversation with Dr. Harrison and hearing all about the Washington State University Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine. All right. Well, I want to welcome Dr. Leila Harrison. I'm really happy to have you with me today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
This has been I've been anticipating this, and you're the first school I'm interviewing out west. So you've helped me crack the western side of the country. So I was really grateful to get you on here, and I'm excited to introduce people to, have you introduce people to Washington State University, Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine. Did I get all that in there correctly?
You did, and I'm honored. I appreciate it.
Oh, great. Hey, well, listen, I want to start off kind of talking about your background a little bit. I just read your bio, but you've been doing admissions for a while. So let's just kind of start off telling people, how did you wind up getting involved in medical school admissions and this trajectory that you're now the Dean of Admissions at Washington State?
Sure. So I always joke that I don't think anybody is in college saying that I want to be an admissions dean at a medical school one day. Like they're not majoring in that, you know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But you're right. My entire career has been in medical school admissions since 2002. Since actually college, I was involved in student affairs types area. So I was a new student orientation leader for 5 years in undergrad and grad school. And I loved that, being a first generation college graduate myself, being able to help people along the journey and support them and so on. And so I realized I had a lot of joy that came from that experience. But I moved from New Mexico, where I grew up, to Texas after graduate school, thinking that I was going to be a licensed professional counselor working on a second master's in Texas, and said, I really enjoyed working in colleges, so I'm going to apply to universities around well-established residency. And I happened to get a position in the admissions office at the Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine in Fort Worth, and working with medical school applicants and recruiting and so on, and more importantly, establishing a statewide pathway program called JAMP back in 2002. Yeah. And so I just loved it. I fell in love with working with college students who were interested in medical school, and sitting in on admissions committees and hearing that discussion, and then seeing them in medical school. And while I finished out that master's, thought, I want to kind of see how this career goes. And it just continued to grow, and was then recruited down to Texas A&M's College of Medicine admissions office as the director of admissions, later promoted to assistant dean there, and just got more involved in the AAMC and with just regional colleagues as well, and just found I really, really loved it. So then 8 years after being at Texas A&M, I got recruited up here to Washington State. And it's funny because I had never even been up in the Pacific Northwest prior to my interview here. And so that was a fun experience. But I got to tell you that one of the things that just made me think, I could move from Texas all the way up to Washington. And mind you, this is in the middle of my husband and I newly married, and he's from South Alabama. Big changes.
Yeah.
But honestly, it was because of the school mission and because of the leadership here.
That's awesome. So you're new to Spokane. So Elson S. Floyd's located in Spokane, Washington, and it's about, from what I've found, about population about 200,000. This is a new hometown for you. So what have you found that you really like about Spokane? What surprised you about Spokane in that area?
So first of all, it's beautiful up here. Our backyard is full of pine trees, and the nearest ski area is 45 minutes from our driveway. Honestly, having grown up in the South all my life, and prior to being here, it's the first place I've been in that truly has 4 seasons. Yeah. And it's just beautiful. The winters, everybody back home asks me about the winters here. And we do get snow. It's a very different from Seattle, which is on the opposite side of the state, over here in Spokane, which we're about 20 minutes from the Idaho border. We do get more snow. It's drier climate out here in higher elevation. And, it's not too bad, actually. The snow is beautiful. City knows how to handle it. Yeah. I don't mind it. And I got to tell you, the late spring, summers, and falls are just beautiful. So we have just really enjoyed being outside. And I mean, we're always just so incredibly surprised that we can eat dinner outside in July and there's no mosquitoes or humidity. Yeah.
You probably couldn't do that too much in College Station or in middle of Texas in July.
Right.
Boiling. Oh, that's great. Right. What have you come to enjoy about, so you guys, now you've become a little more outdoorsy. What do you around the city? What have you kind of found that you really enjoy about in Spokane?
So there's actually a river that runs, the Spokane River runs right through the city. It's not far from our home, and it actually runs right by campus as well. And it's called the Centennial Trail that runs all along the river all the way into Idaho. And so you can bike on it, you can run, walk, and people are out quite a bit here. And so just kind of taking advantage of that, I enjoy running. So running races, there's lots of races out here that you can participate in. I haven't yet been able to, but I'm hoping here this coming winter, being able to, there's a lot of cross-country skiing opportunities, downhill skiing, snowshoeing, lots of winter outdoor sports as well. I mean, there's a rock climbing area probably a mile from our home.
Cool.
So, and I do enjoy rock climbing. I just haven't been able to do it, but, so there's lots of things like that. And the town, I call it a town, even though it's 200,000, the population, I feel like it's a good size of a city. It's easy to get around. There's a lot of cultural things that come into the city. There's, the Spokane is actually on the Spokane, the lands of the Spokane tribe, homelands. And so there are over, I believe over 29 tribes in the state of Washington. So there's a lot of cultural experiences that you can appreciate here as well. So I honestly, when I interviewed here and kind of got to know the people and the atmosphere here, it reminded me like New Mexico where I grew up,
right.
More so than any other place I'd have been.
Oh, that's true. That's great. One question I want to ask you before we kind of switch gears and talk about the College of Medicine. What's one thing, Dr. Harrison, what's something that people are surprised to learn about you? Just to kind of personalize a little bit. Like what are something people are surprised to find out about you?
It's a good, kind of not thought about that. Let me think. I think my colleagues that kind of know me in my work atmosphere, I think sometimes it's surprising to learn that I enjoy rock climbing and have been able to do so in places like France and Texas and so on. And
No kidding.
They don't get to see that side of me, right?
Yeah.
So I get teased about all the running I like to do, and it's just typically a side they don't get to see.
Right.
So I don't know. I think that's the thing that's coming to my mind is maybe those outdoor things like that.
Yeah. You've been rock climbing in France?
Yeah, in the
I'm
Chamonix
surprised
Valley.
to hear that.
Yeah, no, I know, right? It's incredible. Yeah, I wish I could go do that again.
That sounds awesome. Well, hey, let's switch gears. Let's talk about your medical school. And It's a relatively new school. And so it looks like they got the LCME, the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, which is a big accreditation body for all medical schools. You got your provisional accreditation in 2016, and you're into the current students, or the class that you have is in the third year from the initial class, right? They're in their third year now. So why don't you give us a little bit of the history and kind of how the medical school got set up there in Spokane with Washington State?
Yeah. So, and actually, while our first 2 years occur here in Spokane, and we also have a group that will stay here for all 4 years, we also have our clinical campuses in Vancouver, Washington, Tri-Cities area of Washington, and Everett, Washington. So those are where other WSU campuses are.
Okay.
So we're kind of spread out across the state, but so we're a community-based medical school, meaning that we don't funnel all of our students for the clinical training through one or a few teaching hospitals. We actually have over 100 clinical partners across the state. In an effort to really get into the communities of Washington. We were founded with the intent to serve Washingtonians. I think for me, it's remarkable when I came here and I was learning about all this history. So Dr. Floyd was a former president of Washington State University, and he led the charge to found our medical school. And what's interesting is there was actually state law here in Washington. I think it was founded in the early 1900s that stated that there could be only one MD granting medical school in the state of Washington, which boggles my mind coming from a state of Texas that had over 10 medical schools at that time.
Right.
So that state law had to be, there was a lot of work that Dr. Floyd and others had to do to lobby to have that law overturned. There is one DO medical school in the state as well. And so, thankfully, that was that was able to happen. And on April 1st, 2015 is when our program was founded officially. Unfortunately, Dr. Floyd died of cancer that summer, but leaves a tremendous legacy of, well, first of all, so Washington State University itself is a land grant institution. And as a land grant institution, there's a big sort of part of the mission is to serve the communities that are within the state. And so, and Washington State itself, the main institution, our campus is in Pullman, and on the eastern part of the state where Spokane is and where Pullman is, there's a lot of rural areas. In fact, the majority of this part of the state is rural. And so there's major needs for access to care across the state, but very much so in the eastern and central parts of the state. And so the idea was to found this College of Medicine to serve all the communities within Washington, to be Washington focused, and to be within the communities. And so I think having these 4 clinical campuses is part of that. Having clinical partners across the state is part of that. And recruiting our class from all over Washington is also part of that. So that's just kind of a brief overview. I think so. We received preliminary accreditation in October of 2016, and at that time, then received permission to recruit our first class. So we had a truncated inaugural interview season, which was pretty wild. I started
I can imagine.
I started in January 2017, so that was fun. We had a 3-month interview season, so you can imagine. And we had a month of an open application that first cycle. But yeah, so now that inaugural class is in 3rd year. We received provisional accreditation this past June 2018, and we have our full accreditation site visit in October of 2020. So I like to joke that we're in a perpetual accreditation cycle.
Yeah, and those were always so much fun.
Right, and it's, yes, it's constant stress, but I think the positive in it is that you're never resting on your laurels. Yeah. You're always, what do we need to prove? What do we need to build? So it's a good challenge.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like Elson S. Floyd the College of Medicine is filling some of the gaps and some of the voids in that state. And really, it sounds like it's very community driven, and that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
What about, let's kind of talk then about the curriculum a little bit, and talk initially about the highlights of the first couple of years that you like to share with people. I was diving into your website, which is outstanding. Even when you just go to the front page, that video that's on there that's playing, It's really nice. It's really laid out nice and organized. When you're meeting prospective applicants, and when you want to tell them a little bit about some curricular highlights of the first 2 years, what do you like them to take away? How is it structured? What is it? Lecture? Is it small group? Is it a hybrid? What's that kind of look like?
Sure. Well, I'll first say that we have a rock star marketing and communications team, so that doesn't surprise me. I'm glad you enjoyed our website. So in terms of the first 2 years, our the preclinical part of the curriculum is 2 years long. It is a case-based type curriculum, so a lot of small group learning. And when we have large group, it's still, a lot of that is still active learning. The overview of our curriculum, the way like any normal week is, that's not an assessment week, is that students will receive a case on the Monday of that week, and then work through that case throughout the rest of that week. And then on Friday, we have master clinician sessions where we essentially bring in a master clinician to talk about and wrap up that case with the students. And then Monday, they get a new case again. So really great to incorporate that small group learning and to talk through the different aspects of the case. So that's throughout the first 2 years. The other, I think, really important thing, because we have the distributed campus model, so that we have clinical campuses in 4 locations. We don't wait until 3rd year to send our students over to their clinical campus. We have what's called clinical campus weeks. So there are 3 individual weeks in 1st year and 3 individual weeks in 2nd year, where the students, so they know what clinical campus they're assigned to before they matriculate. And that's part of kind of the admissions process and packet and so on. And so typically within the first few months that they're here with us in their first year, they will go to their first clinical campus week. So with their cohort of, let's say 20, they go to Tri-Cities as an example. And they engage for a week with preceptors and clinical faculty and other curriculum and otherwise within the community. So it's an awesome way for them to, one, begin to get some clinical exposure, but also to begin to become familiar with their clinical faculty that's there and their clinical faculty with them, but also
the populations
to begin to be
like
immersed.
there. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, to begin to be immersed within the community, to meet patients, to understand things that are going on in the community, so that when they go in third year, they're even more, they're better informed. The other cool thing I think that is part of that is you think, okay, well, gosh, what do students do for housing for those 3 weeks in first year and 3 weeks in second year? We have a community host program and homestay program. So we actually recruit families and people within these communities who are willing to host our students for those weeks. And they're their family homestay. They
awesome.
Put them up in they have it's really cool. And these are not, some of these people are, physicians in the community, but often they're not. And so this is another way to begin to, become familiar with community and people in the community. And I think it's amazing. These people open up their doors and homes to our students. And we've really seen some really cool relationships that come from that.
I can
imagine. To the point of even inviting them to live with them in third and fourth year. So
that's great.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Can I ask you, Dr. Harrison, can I interrupt you for a second? When students are coming they've enrolled or they're starting med school, can they submit a preference as to which of the 4 clinical sites they'd like to go to, or are they assigned, or if let's say they're from the Everett area or they're from the Richland area, can they say, can I really go back near home, or is the audit assigned differently?
Sure. So as part of the admit packet, they receive a clinical campus ranking form is what I call it. And it's where they rank the 4 campuses in rank order. And then there's a text box to allow them to tell us, what they want us to consider. And so when we receive those back, and of course, with rolling admissions, that's going to shift throughout the admission cycle. But we do our best, obviously, to get them into one of the top choices, but we do prioritize certain things. And those are things like any students that are incoming students with like if they have children, dependents, or partners. So these, or hardship situations, these are things that are immediately impacted by that decision. And so we do prioritize those aspects. And I'll tell you what we're finding here too is we are enrolling an older student here. We have more than 50% of our student body is non-traditional, is defined by age. And so we do have quite a good number of students who have families. And so that's important to us. But they know that, so they would know that before they got here what campus they were assigned to.
Can I ask you, Dr. Harrison, what's kind of it once they do the 3 weeks, so they go to their clinical campus site and they come back, and then they're kind of in the in-depth part of the curriculum, kind of really go through the day-to-day thing that you talked about, getting a case on Monday, working on it throughout the week. How long are students in class a week? Is it an all-day class time, or is it they come in the morning and they leave around lunch? What does the typical day or week kind of look like in those first 2 years?
So it's in the first year, they're heavy in the morning. So typically 8 a.m. and they'll have small group. They may have a large group active learning. They may be in an anatomy lab, that kind of thing. And typically they're done at noon, but there are especially in the first term of that first year, and the term is 14 weeks, they may have a couple of afternoon large group and small group sessions as well, but certainly not every week. It's maybe a couple times a week. So there's a lot of kind of open time in the afternoons in that first year that they can, plan their schedule time or meeting in small groups on their own, that kind of thing. But it's their time to structure as they need to. And then in second year, it's a very similar schedule, except it's flip-flopped in that they have classes in the afternoon. In the morning,
second years get to sleep in.
Yeah, right. They've earned that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So what sounds like to me, there's seems to be a fair amount of flex time. But I think students should be kind of aware of that if you need more structure, kind of built around you, if that's something to be aware of, right? Like that,
right.
you have to have good time management skills is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, for sure. I think for students that maybe have to put more effort into that, then it would be important for them to schedule, maybe even if they can come up with a peer group that they study with, like schedule in some studying time for themselves for accountability and to use that time well. Because they're certainly not scheduled in for our purposes from 8 to 5. That is, and obviously that in the clinical space that's different, but in the first 2 years, that's not the case. So yeah, I think it's kind of, I think especially with having an older student too, having more adult learners. If you are aware of adult learning theory, the idea is that as adult learners, they like some autonomy. They like to be able to have some agency over their time and to like appreciate that their learning is applicable and they can utilize their experiences in their learning. So I feel like that's an apt theory actually when we're talking about adult learners in medical school. So, but certainly I think for them to self-reflect about what their needs are and to impose that structure if they need that.
Yeah. Also, too, is if you have an older population of students, they might have more responsibilities at home. They have families that need to. So having that flex time can probably be helpful in them to juggle everything they have at home too, which is even more things on people's plates if you are in medical school and trying to keep everything, copacetic with their family and their grades at school. Hey, speaking of grades, what's the grading system like in the first 2 years?
So we have a pass-fail grading system actually in all 4 years.
Oh, great.
So it's a complete pass-fail curriculum. Honors are introduced in the clinical years, but first 2 years are pass-fail. And there's research behind that. There's research in terms of, hot topic right now across medical education and graduate medical education is wellness. And there is research that shows that pass-fail grading structures help to reduce stress, help to reduce competitiveness across the class, which makes sense. But yeah, that's what we use.
That's especially important too when you do a lot of small group learning, that you know that we're not competing with one another. We're all in this together and sharing information and learning from one another. Common question that we all get, Dr. Harrison, is so I did my 3 weeks of clinical exposure early on at my clinical site, but then how often do I get to see patients in my first 2 years? What's the preclinical curriculum look like at college?
Sure. Yeah, we have preceptorship opportunities outside of those 3 clinical campus weeks each year, and so that they can engage in clinical experiences that way as well. And then as part of the curriculum in these cases, sometimes as part of those working through those cases, the faculty may elect to bring in either a patient panel or a patient to further explain the case with the students. So those are different ways. And then obviously, like many schools, we use OSCEs starting in first year to help them let them help practice their clinical skills, and so we utilize standardized patients for those activities. But so those are introduced early on as well.
And so for the OSCE is probably a new word we haven't introduced yet into our glossary of terms for pre-medical students. It's kind of like it's simulating practicing working with patients and doing physical examinations and that kind of thing, right?
Right, exactly. It's to mimic what an experience would be like. Typically, the students are observed through maybe a two-way mirror or a video camera in the room, so that the faculty can give them feedback about how they did. Maybe they missed a question or something. But yeah, it stands for Objective Structured Clinical Exam. And so it's a structured way of learning and a structured way of assessing the students about their clinical skills and giving them feedback.
Yeah, I'll put a link to what OSCEs are in the show notes so people, if they want to dive into a little bit more, but it's an important way to practice, what physicians do. So you make mistakes there and you can learn from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. It's, and sometimes too, the opportunity to hear from standardized patients themselves, like, okay, your hands are really cold, or this question was really uncomfortable, or, that they can hear directly from people in the community that are serving as standardized patients. It's something about the acronyms that made me giggle there when you said that is, I always tell applicants on interview day that they need to start learning all these acronyms. There's tons of them in medical education. So having a glossary of all these acronyms would be helpful.
Hey, so with some of this flex time students have, I'm sure they're getting involved in other activities and student groups. Can students start to get involved in a little bit of research? I think from what I saw in my research about your medical school, that there's a scholarly project. Can somebody start that early?
Yeah, they can. They can actually start that in first year, and they have 3.5 years to complete it. It has to be done by the middle of December of their fourth year, the middle of the year of their fourth year, so December. But so it is a required part of our curriculum, and the scholarly project is pretty flexible. Actually, they can. It's such an opportunity for them to, further be engaged in something they're really passionate about. It can be a hypotheses research-driven project that they're working directly with, a research faculty member. It can be a community-based project. It can be a curriculum project. It can be so many things. It's quite broad and open for them to really kind of go after things they're excited about. And they have a faculty advisor that works with them on that. But absolutely, it could include research in which, and if they wanted to get involved in that first year, that's a possibility for sure.
Walk us through, this is kind of a unique piece for a medical school to have as a required research piece. We have one, but you do too. What's kind of the ethos or the philosophy behind requiring a medical student to do their own research project?
Well, and so, and like I said, it doesn't even have to be necessarily traditional research, but I think generally, I think that the idea behind the scholarly project is, my curriculum faculty would be able to explain this a lot better than me, but it's just to begin to get them to think about a problem or an area they want to make an impact in, and think about solutions in a critical way. I think it also dovetails really nicely with one of the big aspects of our goals, and sort of the founding of our medical school was not only to serve all Washingtonians, but it was to also make an impact in rural and underserved communities. So our vision statement is to inspire people to solve problems in challenging healthcare environments, right? Which there are many in the state of Washington, like many other places. And so if they can begin to think in the scholarly project in a way of, how can I find a solution? How can I make an impact? It's another way of embedding these kind of skills within the curriculum. So it's not just being in the anatomy lab or being in these small groups, but it's, think of a problem. We want to inspire you to solve problems in challenging areas. And so this is a good practice way of doing that as well.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I also feel like when students are required to do some kind of scholarly project like this, they're gaining an appreciation for the time and effort and the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into just one manuscript. So they get to see what goes on behind the scenes, because they're going to get journals for the rest of their lives. And
absolutely
appreciate, and be able to critically analyze these articles and decide if they want to implement something, what they're reading, into their practice, and absolutely stay up to date on the changes in the literature, because patients are going to print off like the entire internet and WebMD when they come in sometimes.
That's right.
How about, let's talk a little bit, any other highlights about the first 2 years? Any other things that you want people to know about?
Sure, absolutely. One thing I was going to jump in about was, so we have a leadership certificate as part of our MD program. So it's a required component, and it's all 4 years. And so this gets me really excited. But so here's the idea. We nationally produce all these physicians, but are we ever really training them in how to be a leader? Not a doctor, we're talking about a leader in any context, but of course they're going to be medical leaders. So And the answer is no. I mean, really, you don't see very much of this focused time in the curriculum that is about like just leadership.
Yeah, you're
what is
absolutely
leadership
right.
theory, right? And so thankfully, our founding dean, Dr. Tom Kobiak, I mean, this is a big strength of his, and he gets excited about this as well. He's a master's in leadership, and he, is a champion for having this in our curriculum. But so throughout the first 2 years, and then it continues as well. But they have a course that's a leadership course, and they are learning about theory. They're learning about they're reading up on sometimes healthcare cases and how leadership was involved or not involved. We're a lot of self-reflection. So the certificate amounts to a third of what a master's degree in leadership would be. And so it's their master level leadership courses.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. I think it's so important. And so when they graduate with ANSI, they also graduate with this leadership certificate as well. So we're really hoping that will make an impact on them being better leaders and better managers when they're out and practice with their teams and with patients.
Mm-hmm. That's really unique. I love that. To talk a little bit about some of the third and fourth year kind of glows. One thing I noticed that when I was doing my research was that your third year is structured into the clinical curriculum instruction, what are called longitudinal integrated curriculum, or LICs. Tell us what that is, because again, this is another new term that hasn't come up on a previous episode before. So educate.
Okay. Sure. So LIC or LIC, and it's longitudinal integrated clerkship. So it's the way I explain it to applicants when they're interviewing is that, so most people are familiar with the traditional model in third year where you have the core areas of medicine that you're going to get experience through in your clerkships. And these clerkships are blocked clerkship. So maybe you have 6 weeks in family medicine, 12 weeks in surgery, 12 weeks internal medicine, and so on across, kind of continuously across the third year until you get exposure to all these core areas of medicine. So every medical school is going to teach you or give you exposure to these core areas in your third year. So a longitudinal integrated clerkship is, again, similar exposure to, you're going to have exposure to these core areas, but instead of doing them consecutively in these blocked formats, you do it concurrently. And so you might be in family medicine and surgery in the same week. You might be in OB-GYN and peds in the same week. But basically you're getting exposure to those areas across the entirety of that third year, so that it's not just that you have the 6 weeks of family medicine at the beginning of your third year, and then you never see family medicine again. In an LIC, you might have exposure to family medicine throughout that third year. I think some of the big things about, or big benefits of an LIC is that so they get to see the continuity of medicine. Our students are assigned a patient panel to follow throughout the course of third year. So an example of that might be, let's say they have a patient that they see in family medicine clinic that then is referred to surgery. In a traditional block format, if they were in their family medicine rotation, once that patient was referred out to surgery, their friends over in surgery get to see what's going on with that patient, right? They don't get to follow up. They don't know what happened. Whereas in an LIC, if that patient's part of their patient panel, they get to follow that patient then along through in surgery, post-op care, and so on. So they can really kind of see that continuity of healing and of care. And the other thing too, I think that's a benefit, is that they are able to develop longer term relationships with their clinical faculty in these core areas. So a similar example in family medicine, let's say that they really want to go into family medicine, but and that's their first rotation in that traditional block format. And so, 9 months later, when they're getting ready to apply to residency at the end of their third year, but they haven't seen their family medicine clinical faculty in all that time, they're going to have to go back and make those concerted efforts to reconnect and so on. Whereas in an LIC, they may have been with that clinical faculty all along, building that relationship.
Yeah, really got to know them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So those are some of the benefits of it. But yeah, so it's not common. So there are a lot of medical schools across the nation that that utilize an LIC for one of their tracks of third years. So at A&M, I came from Texas A&M, like I mentioned, and there we had a distributed campus model as well. And one of the clinical campuses utilized an LIC, but the other campuses did the traditional block format.
Okay.
But here at Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine, all 4 of our clinical campuses utilize the LIC. And I can imagine that probably one of the reasons that it isn't utilized more broadly across the entire student bodies at medical schools that use it is because it's incredibly resource intensive. It requires a lot of coordination. You're having to really kind of get clinical faculty thinking that, well, I'm not going to see this person every day, all day for 6 weeks. I might see them a couple days each week. While they go interact with my other colleagues in the other areas. So it's different in that way. But I think at this point, from what I understand, there are only 2 medical schools, including us, that use the LIC across the entire student body.
Yeah, that's really unique. And it sounds, it makes a lot of sense. I think I've heard from our curricular people that that this is something that's going to probably become more popular in the next few years. It's one of those curricular changes that people have been examining. And I saw on your website that it said that in 2000, there were a handful of medical schools using LICs. And then in 2014, there were 44 medical schools using LICs. So it just kind of shows how people are examining, looking at trends in medical education and what things are becoming more effective in training med students. And so with that, medical schools are changing their curricula accordingly. And clearly, your College of Medicine has really embraced that and said, we're going all in, and everybody's doing that. What else about the third year do you like people to know?
So as part of our, again, this is kind of links back to our mission as well. So our students will be required to complete clinical experience in a rural or underserved area. And we have clinical partners in rural and underserved areas at each of our sites, including some tribal clinics. So our students will be required to do an experience in a rural or underserved area. And part of that goes back to, we can't just say we want to enroll these students because we hope in the end they will serve these communities and then not provide them any opportunities to experience it while they're here. Right? We sort of need to do our due diligence ourselves. And so that's part of that is making that part of the curriculum so that they will indeed have that experience while they're with us.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Harrison, since the students maybe 3/4 of them are leaving the Spokane area to go to these other clinical sites, is there a way for them to stay connected with the main campus back in Spokane? Do they have like weekly webinars, or how do they stay connected back to the main campus?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't think they may, if they're involved in, various things. As an example, in our admissions committee, we do have students, and some of them are third years. And so we might see them on Zoom for an admissions committee meeting. If they're part of experiences like that, they might. Otherwise, I believe that it really is a focus on their clinical campus and community at that point. So at every clinical campus, we have an associate dean for clinical education who is there, with his or her own team. And so that with that team, that is sort of becomes their home base. And we really try not to, we really want it to be such that Spokane is not sort of the main campus, even though most of the administration's here, but that we really are one College of Medicine across these four locations. I think the students very much sort of, when they move for third year, are immersed into that community, and honestly, probably don't have a whole lot of time to reconnect back. Right. We haven't yet reached the point of match day or graduation or anything like that, obviously. But there's likely going to be occasions in the future for celebrations like that where we can bring the whole class back together again. But I think for now they're out and busy, and So to kind of wrap up the curricular aspect of the school, one thing I wanted to ask you, since it's a new curriculum and students now are going through now they're into the third year, have there been any modifications now that users have kind of gone through the first 2 years that they're like, okay, well, the first years that are now third years said like, well, okay, gotta change this stuff. Are they open to suggestions? Is the administration
conversation, open to suggestions from the users, the students, about changes.
Absolutely. Yeah, probably more so than I've seen at the other two medical schools that I've been at.
Okay.
Students have quite a big voice here, and in particular, that inaugural class had a lot of opportunity to shape changes that were coming after them, because, we were, and we are trying things, that are new and maybe not common across medical education, or just different ways of doing things. And so we did seek out their feedback in a lot of areas, and absolutely made adjustments based off of that input. I'll give you just a concrete example of that. So for the inaugural class, we had, our orientation week, and then they officially matriculate and start the curriculum. And there was an attempt to sort of ease them into it. And so I think it was the first 2 or 3 weeks, I can't remember the total length. It wasn't as rigorous in those first few weeks. It was, here's some exposure. It was sort of a more kind of a continuation of orientation, if you will, maybe a little bit more strenuous than traditional orientation, but to kind of ease them in. And one of the things that we heard a lot of students say was, no, we're ready just to hit it running. Like we're ready to go, and so they actually really were like, no,
bring it on.
We think you should just go ahead and start. Yeah. And so that was an adjustment that was made for the second class that came in. And so it's kind of surprising that they were ready to go. Yeah.
But you love the eagerness, and they're hungry. Right? They're ready to get after it. So I think, Dr. Harrison, you really have amped listeners up, especially those that are in Washington. It sounds like a really exciting place to be. Let's talk about the main question that people want to hear is like, okay, so how do I get in? What are you looking for in me? And I think that we need to really spend some time talking about the initial thing is the eligibility requirements, because there's something unique about that. So tell us about how the application then now works with regards to the eligibility requirements.
Sure. And I get really excited. So I'll try not to speak fast, because I speak fast when I get excited. But one of the things that I love the opportunity to be able to talk about this specific point in particular, because for me as an admissions dean, it's really important to be transparent to our applicant pool and to the population that's looking at us, because I want them to make informed decisions about spending their money to apply to our program. It's really disconcerting to me when I see a lot of applicants that are just spending money to apply to AMCAS, and then they're going nowhere in our process. So I really try to be transparent on our website about what we're looking for and so on. So in order, because we're so mission focused and all about Washington, and we'll get into holistic review later, but a big part of holistic review is that your mission is at the center of it. Your mission really should then guide your process. It should guide your requirements. And so that's very evident in our process. So in order to receive a secondary application from us, applicants have to meet certain criteria. And again, that's laid out on the MSAR and on our website. So I'll go through those briefly. The first is they have to be a U.S. citizen or U.S. permanent resident. We have to have all their letters of recommendation in from AMCAS, the ones that we require. And that is so that that's a check. And once the secondary is back, we don't have to be looking for your letters anymore. So we do require the letters to be in for the secondary. And then they have to show that they have some sort of ties or connections to Washington. And this makes sense, right? If we want to produce positions for Washington, and there is research that tells us that the more sort of connections or training that a person has to a location or state or region, those are all sort of predictors of whether they'll come back and serve those communities. And so if we want to produce positions for the state of Washington, we should be looking at how connected they are to the state. So we look at a couple of things. Either applicants have to meet 3 of 4 what we call ties to Washington, and those are they have to be, 3 of 4 of the following: born in the state, have a childhood address in AMCAS in the state, so some sort of childhood address here. They graduated from Washington High School, and or their parents currently live in the state. And so if they have 3 of 4 of those, then we consider them as having ties to the state, and it doesn't even matter what their residency that they declare on AMCAS is. If they have the ties and they're, let's say, an Oregon resident, the ties alone allows them to meet that requirement.
Okay.
if they don't meet 3 or 4 ties, then they have to meet a legal definition of, it's called resident student. That's the term in Washington law, but they have to basically show that they are true residents of the state. So they maybe didn't grow up here, but they have established domicile here. And
Sure.
we do verify that. So they have to submit documentation and so on.
Okay.
And so so one of those 2 things. And then the last thing is that they have to meet one of 3 different combination thresholds for the MCAT and GPA.
Okay.
And this is quite unique, and I can certainly get into this in more depth here in a little bit, but those are all outlined on our website. That is data informed by a huge set of national data from the AAMC that tells us that applicant or students with those combinations of MCAT and GPA are successful in getting through medical school across the nation. So they just have to meet one of those, and they're sort of tiered. So if an applicant has a high undergraduate GPA, then they can have a lower MCAT. If they have a lower undergraduate GPA, they have to have a higher MCAT score.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they don't meet it with their undergraduate GPA, but they've pursued graduate work or a graduate degree in a basic science or medical science area, then we will utilize their graduate GPA. And we have a different set of
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask that. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to put a link in the show notes, because this is really very detailed eligibility requirements. So I'll make a link to that so people can find that and see that in on your website, because it's worth really looking at. Because like you said, you don't want people to waste money. It's already incredibly expensive process.
It is, and we do see every year, and it's through efforts like this and our website and our talks that I'm hoping to. I'm actually all for having a reduced AMCAS applicant pool if we have a higher secondary eligibility pool. Like, that tells me that people are applying here that are actually eligible to apply here, because in these first 3 cycles and now 4th cycle we're in. We absolutely have hundreds of applicants who are submitting the application that have zero connection to our state, don't meet the metrics requirements, and and I've talked to a couple of them, and they're like, "Oh, it looked cool," and I'm like, "No, you're spending money. You're just wasting money." So read the requirements.
Right. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad we're covering this, because we want to get that out there. Because again, very expensive process. Don't want you to waste your money.
Correct.
So, Dr. Harrison, what are you looking for? Okay, I've met all these eligibility requirements. What do you want from me? What are you kind of characteristics or attributes or values do you look for in your applicants that are meeting your mission-based admissions process?
Sure. So what I'll say is that, once they meet all of those requirements to get the secondary, then they return the secondary back to us. An incredibly unique aspect of our admissions process is that at that point, we program our system so that it blinds MCAT and GPA, all GPAs and any MCAT score. It blinds it.
Say so that again. That is that's the first time I think anybody's ever said that on this show.
I know. I've never, and I have obviously some of my closest colleagues across the nation are admissions deans, and I know of no other process like this where so once the secondary gets returned, it's then going to be assigned to 2 screeners that are going to screen the application and make recommendations for an interview. But before it's assigned to those screeners, the system blinds MCAT scores and all GPAs. We do see a running sort of individual grades, but a calculated GPA and MCAT scores are no longer in the application. And so what that means, and that then remains true for the entirety of the rest of our process. So the admissions committee members never see MCAT and GPA in our process, ever. Yeah.
But they got to trust the process then. They then clearly everybody trusts the process.
Well, here's the thing. Why do you need to continue to assess MCAT and GPA? That it's concrete information. There's a lot of research on it. If you've established thresholds that tell you that students will be successful in those combinations, why do you need to continue to assess it? We feel like we don't. We've assessed it. We can move on. And so what that does for us is it completely frees us to then focus on attributes and experiences. So we, the admissions committee, identified a set of life experiences and personal attributes or personal characteristics that we believe would, if an applicant has these things or some of these, they are connected to our mission. These are people that are going to hopefully help us carry out our mission to serve Washington, to solve problems in challenging healthcare environments, to be innovative, to be leaders, and so on. And so just like you asked, this is one of the more common questions, right? What are you looking for? How can I be competitive? And I tell applicants, I'm like, it is right on our website where we talk about holistic review. We talk about life experiences and personal attributes. That is what we're looking for. So as an example, the life experience at the first one that we list is experience with rural and or underserved communities and populations. And it makes sense, right? If we want to make an impact in those communities in Washington, we definitely would like to see applicants who either come from those communities themselves or have spent time serving those communities so that they're better informed of what the barriers are, what are the challenges, be more empathetic toward those populations, so that they can begin to think about solutions to helping those populations, and then maybe are passionate about serving those populations when they're done. So it makes sense with our mission that we would say we're looking for people with experience with rural and underserved communities and populations. That we are looking for people with clinical exposure, and that's simply that students or applicants have informed themselves about the medical career. They have some idea. We certainly don't expect them to know what kind of position they want to be or to have a tremendous amount. In fact, we don't quantify it. We're not looking for a certain number of hours or anything like that.
Oh my gosh. I was just going to ask you that because people always ask, how many hours do we need?
3 hours, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't. We're looking for really the quality of experience. So it can be, they don't have, let's say that they, we've seen a good handful this year of people who were CNAs. They were CNAs. And my gosh, it's interesting to hear physicians in the room on the admissions committee there that they'll say that is hard work. Yeah. That is important work. And maybe they have zero shadowing time, but they worked as a CNA.
Well, you're working directly with patients and doing some of the things that aren't very glamorous. It's patient care. It's taking care of somebody and helping somebody. And the other thing too that I tell, I'm sorry, this is where I get excited, but that I tell applicants a lot is, here's what applicants do, and here's what, hopefully they're listening to this. They should not go to these two medical schools websites and say, okay, this school really cares about rural and underserved. So in my secondary essay, I'm going to say, I want to be a rural physician one day. And they're like, oh, well, okay, great. So let's look at your experiences then, and let's look at your own background. You grew up in an urban area. None of your experiences are with rural communities. So I think applicants you got to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Yes, yes. Like we're not dumb, right? We're like, no, sorry, we don't believe you, and so applicants absolutely should be able to demonstrate through their actions that they're supporting what they're saying to medical schools. Because medical schools are going to be looking for that. And so if you say that you want to be a doctor, but you have no exposure to healthcare or medicine, then it's really tough for admissions committees to say, okay, we're going to take a chance on you, because when you get into medical school, first of all, if you're not passionate about it or you don't know what you got yourself into, man, it's a quick way to leave. You don't have anything tying you to it, right? Yep. But I also hear the other thing too. I think it's important for applicants to think about. They should not glamorize medicine. They should not, believe it or not, I've had in an interview applicants, when asked why medicine, have said, because I watched the show Scrubs and that looks cool,
Oh boy.
And I immediately I'm like,
no.
Like, thank you. We're done with the interview, right? But, they should not glamorize medicine. They should absolutely, as much as they can, read about and inform themselves about what are the challenges in healthcare. What are the challenges in being a physician? What are the personal challenges that come with that? There is a lot of research out there now, a lot of, resources in blogs, podcasts, whatever you can think of that are about wellness in physicians. And there's a reason, and that is because it is tough. It is stressful. Yep. And we need to do more to help. So I'll get on my soapbox for a second, but that is normalize. Yeah. But it's normalize wellness, normalize taking care of yourself, from the very get-go, being a medical student all the way through, and that if you need help, you seek help. It is not a weakness to reach out to people because you need help. We need to just break through this whole sort of cultural expectation that as a physician, you're somehow, perfect always and not going to need to take care of yourself.
You're not a superhero.
Yeah. So anyway, so I think that kind of clinical exposure, just having a little bit more depth to your understanding is really important. We also emphasize service, and what we mean here is non-healthcare service. What I tell applicants is when you go volunteer in the hospital, that's great. And that informs informs your decision to pursue medicine, but it is directly aligned with your own personal goals. When you go and you spend every Saturday morning serving the homeless breakfast for months on end, that is truly about serving other people. It's altruistic. And that tells us something totally different than when you do not, volunteering in a healthcare context. So, the compassion, empathy, other focused, being ethically responsible to helping other people. I mean, that's also important to the kind of physician that we want to train. So we look for that too.
And if I could interrupt you a little here for a second, Dr. Harrison, I want to give a timeout and just say what you just said about medically related experiences and service. This applies to, obviously, it's a part of your mission at the College of Medicine, but this is general advice for anybody applying to medical school. Would you agree? I mean, this is not something new that you're telling people just because now you're at Washington State. I bet you've been saying this when you were in Texas too.
Yeah, I don't think any medical school is going to say, "Oh, we don't care about service," right? They all care about service, and don't do it just to check the box. Medical schools can also sort of suss out whether or not that was like a genuine want to do that experience. You should truly immerse yourself and find a service experience that you really align with, where you really connect with. We're not looking for any specific type of service, but go do something that you just get really passionate about, excited about, that's fulfilling for you. But I'll tell you the other way that comes across. If they're truly doing it in a genuine way, it comes across in how they reflect on the experience, both in the application and then in an interview.
Yes, I was going to say that. Yep. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm getting excited too.
Because if they speak about it in a superficial way, or they really can't talk about depth, then, or in their explanation on the activity, volunteered at a homeless shelter, served breakfast, was there 5 hours. If it's just the facts, we don't
get anything from it.
What'd you get out of it? Yeah, exactly. So applicants absolutely should be engaging in these experiences to learn and grow and develop empathy and better understand people, others, and not just to check a box because medical schools are looking for it.
Yeah, I think what we're saying here is we can't stress enough how important it is for you to take the time to write those self-evaluations and those self-reflections of what you took away from all this time that you've been volunteering. You haven't been paid for some of these things. And tell us what you got out of it, because that's where the real, that's when applicants rise to the top. When you read these things, like, oh my gosh, they get it. Oh my gosh, they're so self-reflective. They sound really mature, so that they really are ready for this, and versus just the facts.
Yeah, it tells you a little bit about personal insight that applicant has. It tells you, I think sometimes we've all seen applications where cultural sensitivity or humility is weak for the applicant. And so maybe they say, I volunteered with, and I'll tell you real situations I've seen where, we've read essays where somebody's referring to maybe a volunteer experience like this, and then they refer to the people that they were volunteering with as it was really smelly and they were rude, and they actually reflect on the experience like this. And what that tells me is many things. It tells me you're insensitive, you're not compassionate, why were you there? But it also tells me you have zero self-awareness and cultural humility, which frankly, I'm like, okay, thank you for putting that out there so that we're aware, because that is, you're not ready to be a physician. And so I think, applicants really need to kind of, here's the thing, we are biased human beings. Every one of us has bias. Absolutely. And so, but those are getting yourself out of your comfort zone and going and volunteering and serving people that is, you don't have a lot of familiarity with, or you haven't had a lot of exposure with, makes you break out of that comfort zone, makes you address personal bias. It makes you really reflect on what other people face in our country. And because here's the thing, except for maybe some cases, for the most part, when you practice medicine, you're not going to get to choose which patients you serve. Mm-hmm. You serve them all equally and equally compassionate. So you need to expose yourself so that knowing that you're going to serve a broadly diverse patient population that deserves the same quality of care as anybody.
Mm-hmm. Not every patient's going to be attractive or grateful or friendly or happy. No. And that's just the fact of life. That's just the way it goes. Absolutely. And you have to treat them the same just as you do every other patient. Oh, absolutely. You have me excited. This is, I'm vibing with you. This is awesome.
Good. I'm glad. This is so important.
Yeah. What, let's see. Well, if we've kind of gone through your application screening process, are the applications screened by more than one person?
Yeah. So after the secondary is returned, it is assigned to 2 individual screeners. And so and this is again part of holistic review, but and frankly good practice, but you have a defined rubric. So we have a defined rubric evaluation form that both individual screeners, and they're independently rescreening the application using the same rubric, and they then make recommendations for interviews. And so those recommendations come back to me, and I am sometimes a screener as well, so I'm part of that big pool. But these 2 independent screeners make these recommendations, and that's what I use to inform who receives an interview. One of the things that's important to me in an admissions process is that an admissions dean is not making sole decisions on their own. That their decisions are informed by their process, informed by the people that they have involved, and informed, most importantly in selection by the admissions committee. So I don't make any independent decisions except for the individual evaluations I may be doing that's coupled with somebody else doing one as well. Mm-hmm. So when I'm making interview invitations, it's not because Leila likes them. It's because these 2 evaluations informed that invite. Mm-hmm. And then so they come in for interview, and I don't know if you want to talk about that now.
Let's just go right to the interview day. So you get the invitation. Sure. The interview day seems to be a full day of activities. Walk us through what that day is like.
Sure. So they check in the morning, and the morning is a lot of presentations. So probably 90% of the time, our founding dean, Dr. Tom Koviak, he, I think, gets energized by speaking with applicants. So he comes down and welcomes them and talks to them for a bit. And then typically one of our vice deans also speaks to them. And then our student affairs team will come and talk about, how student affairs supports them and resources that are available. I speak to them about the curriculum overview, and then also about our admissions process, where I, again, try to be really transparent about what are next steps, what can here's what we expect, here's what I can answer, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And then right before lunch, they will hear from our 4 associate deans for clinical education about the clinical campuses. So those associate deans get to talk about what's it like to be in Tri-Cities and who are we affiliated with here and that kind of thing, to give them a brief overview of their clinical campuses. Then they have lunch with our medical students. And what I love about this is me and my staff leave the room. We're not in the room with them, so that they can have free and open conversations with our students and ask questions. And then in the afternoon is when the interviews occur. And so we have each MMI cycle for us can accommodate 10 applicants each. So while the first group of 10, so we have 20 applicants each day. So the first group of 10 will do the interviews. The second group of 10 is then touring and doing some of the things in the meantime, and then they swap. Okay. But that's the last thing of the day, is the MMIs and the tours.
How many MMI stations do you do?
So we do a hybrid MMI, meaning that we have 7 scenario stations, and these are 5 minutes long each, and they're all scenario based. So there's no acting or team building stations. And then we have a longer 13-minute, more traditional interview. It's still a structured interview, but it's not scenario-based. They don't get to see outside the door what's going to be asked of them, but they can anticipate that they're going to be asked about themselves.
Sure.
Whereas the other ones are, the scenarios. And so that's all within one cycle. The entire cycle is an hour and 20 minutes. So it's 5 minutes interviews, 5-minute scenario interviews. They have a minute to transition, 2 minutes to read the next scenario. And then that 13-minute station is basically just a double scenario station with the time in between is what that time comes out to.
During the one-on-one interview, does that interviewer have access to the applicant's application, and they can see, or what's their application access, I guess is my question.
So the entirety of the MMI is completely blinded. So even that one-on-one interview along with the rest, nobody has access to any or they've not reviewed any aspect of the application in preparation for the interview. Yeah, so it's completely blinded.
Okay.
And one of the things I think is really cool, and we did this intentionally, was when the applicants are getting ready to do their cycle of interviewing, we give them a list of the stations that they'll, in the order in which they'll go, but we don't tell them who their interviewer is. We don't say, this is Dr. So-and-so, and they're the vice dean of whatever, or the chair of whatever department. Because what comes with that is a lot of stress. Like, oh my gosh, I'm about to interview with so-and-so, right?
Yep.
Instead, it's like, okay, this is your next room. And so when they come in, we also give our interviewers name badges that simply have their first name on it, so that if it's like, oh, I'm interviewing with John, and I have no idea who John is or what he does here, or even, because we also use community members in our interviewing as well. So they don't know. And so the point is that we're not adding additional stress and distraction by those things. It's, you're interviewing John, because it's not about what John is who John is or what he does. It's about this interview. And so it's one of the ways we try to help reduce stress.
Oh, that's great. I love that idea. How do you tell incoming students that are coming to interview there how to prepare for MMI? Do you send them some materials, say, here, think about these things, or this is what you can anticipate? Because I think this is kind of a black box for some students, because the MMI, it's a lot of med schools use it now, but it's still kind of not everybody's as familiar with its process.
So we actually don't send them any materials or give them sort of any indicators of what we're going to ask. What I tell applicants is that, first of all, we're not going to choose scenarios that you have to have specialized knowledge to answer. The important thing there is that we don't want to disadvantage any applicant we're interviewing. And, so maybe, there very likely we're interviewing applicants that come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So to ask some question that would have required some sort of exposure that would disadvantage them, that doesn't make sense. So we don't do that. And typically these scenarios they're not right or wrong answers. A lot of it is we want to see how you work through the scenario. What is your perspective? What are the different ways you think about it? So they're not straightforward. They're not like, well, this had a right answer or a wrong answer. It's, how did you think through the scenario? And a lot of times, so they can be a scenario such as, you were in organic chemistry lab and your best friend was cheating in their lab book. What do you do? Like, how do you handle that situation? Right. So, well, that's an ethical dilemma, right? Yeah. And so how do you work through that? Like, anybody could work through that.
Yeah.
Another scenario might be, tell us about a stressful time in your life and how did you work through that? Well, again, everybody can answer a scenario like that. Yeah. Okay. I think a lot of it is, I think for us specifically, what I tell them is just be a reflective person. Be somebody who thinks through what you've done in life and how you've grown and how you've handled different situations, because you're going to be able to pull from those experiences when you're reading the scenarios to answer them.
Wonderful advice. Then I guess moving on to the last kind of chapter of our conversation here is what happens in admissions committee. So you get all this data back from the MMI or the HMMI, and the group meets and you sit down. How are decisions kind of made, and then how often do you send your decisions out to applicants?
So So actually there's an in-between stage after an applicant's gone through the MMIs, and those MMI evaluations are then obviously attached to the full application. Then they go to, the application gets assigned to 2 reviewers, and these are only admissions committee members. So 2 individual admissions committee members do another full evaluation of the application. And at this point, they're then making recommendations for acceptance to the admissions committee. That's not a driver. It doesn't decide anything. It's just that 2 people on the committee have read through this full application now with the MMIs and are now making recommendations. And one of those typically will present that application. And, but the rest of us are able to see all of the materials are for ourselves. We're not relying on what they're presenting to us. But it's through all of that then information that we have to then in the way we individually make our decisions, and then that produces a rank list. And in terms of how, so first of all, we try to meet frequently enough so that we are staying caught up with the polls, that the interviewee groups that we're bringing in. So, and then per WMC traffic rules, October 15th is the first day that we nationally can make offers for a regular pool, which is passed. And I always tell applicants, I don't ever tell them specifically what days we'll make offers on, but I try to give them, I'm like, okay, end of October, we will make our first round of offers.
If I can interject, I made that mistake early on in my career, and they said, when are we going to hear about this? Oh, you're going to hear on November 3rd. And so on November 3rd came, and guess what was down that day? AMCAS. And we couldn't put our actions in. It wasn't our fault. AMCAS just happened to be down. Our phones blew up. We were getting pounded on studentdoctor.net. And like, that guy said it would be out today. And
they'll roast you for it. So you have to be careful.
So now I'm purposely vague, like just like you.
Yes.
Not at the end of October-ish, beginning of November.
Yes, because and I get where they're coming from too, right? Because they're just in limbo out there. They're like, they're trying to hang on to any shred of anything that they get, right? So they're like, okay, November 3rd, I am going to be refreshing my screen every second, and then they're like, how could you do this to me?
I thought I was trying to, because I was trying to be like, hey, I know you've been waiting a long time. November 3rd is supposed to be the day, and then tilt.
Yeah, absolutely. So same way for me. I'm like, I'll say for sure end of October, and then another round before the end of the calendar year, and then sometimes they'll misquote you on Student Doctor, but that's okay.
Happens all the time.
But and so in terms, because we're a newer school too. And also just, through my experience, I tend to be, I think, more conservative in offers in terms of how many I make at any given time. And I want to clarify here too, that Dr. Harrison, by myself, I'm not just choosing who to make offers to. The offers are completely informed by the admissions committee. So I'm not independently making those decisions. And I think that that's really important for applicants to know, that is actually dictated by the LCME. The LCME require medical schools, admissions committees, which are, made up by varying bylaws, but typically faculty make up the admissions committee, that it is that body that is making those selection decisions. It is not the dean of the medical school. It's not the admissions dean by themselves. They may be part of that process, but them alone are not making that decision.
We work at the behest of the admissions committee. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
We put that on our website, on our contact us page. It says, we don't make the decisions, the admissions committee does. So you can email us.
But does, right?
Yeah, we have to. That's the way the LCME requires us to work. You're absolutely right. I'm glad you said that.
Yep, absolutely. So we tend to make offers. We're not filling the class by the end of 2019, for example. The other thing that's really important to me, like we interview this cycle, our last interview day is February 10th. It is really important to me that the people coming in to interview on February 10th know that they are viable candidates. They are not interviewing for a waitlist spot. And so I have not filled the class by that point, and they will be eligible for those initial 80 seats to fill the class. And it's after that point of them being assessed through the admissions committee, we've made our final seats to fill the class, then I form the wait list. I want people on February 10th to know you are just as good of an applicant as those that came in August. We want you here. You matter. And I think that really makes a difference to them.
Yeah. We've been waiting for you. We've been very judicious in how we've been giving out our acceptances so it's fair and equitable to everybody. Absolutely. I think we do the same thing. I totally agree with that. And I think we say the same kind of things to the applicants that come in January and February. Like, we've been waiting for you. You're just, like you said, it means a lot to say you're just as important as those that came back in September, but just so happens we got to you later on or something like that. So, right. That's great stuff. Any kind of, just to kind of wrap this up, is there anything else that you felt that we didn't touch on, kind of try to put our foot on all the bases? Did we cover everything that you wanted to talk about when you came on today?
In general, so I think I think one thing, if I could touch on holistic review real quick.
I guess I should have said about Washington State
about the admissions
before
process?
We talk about it. Holistic review.
Okay.
Did we
no, I think. I think so. I think first of all, it's important to know that every medical school has a completely different way of how they process their applications, and so it might be different from school to school depending on if they're interviewing at multiple places of how they do things. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to wrap up with a little bit was, because of your background in being a facilitator, a trainer for the AAMC and holistic review, you've gone to other medical schools, admissions committees, and helped them understand how to incorporate holistic review into their admissions committee practices. When I read that in your bio, I've been getting a lot of emails from applicants lately, or from listeners that have been saying, hey, I hear a lot about this holistic review. How does it really work? I'm not quite understanding how admissions committees use it. So with your experience, I wanted to hear from you as a facilitator. Walk us through kind of how you help admissions committees put that into their processes.
So there's a saying that if you've seen one admissions process, you've seen one admissions process, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're all so different. So I think there's a couple of main tenets about holistic review, and for certainly medical schools are incorporating it in different ways. But first of all, holistic review is driven by the school mission. So the more sort of defined the school mission and the school goals and vision and so on, the more sort of detailed it is. I think that sometimes easier. Sometimes medical school missions are very, very broad. And so it's hard for, I think, committees to really kind of wrap their head around, how do you interpret that, or where do you go from that? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a benefit we have at Washington. We're pretty clear what we're trying to do in our state. So mission is at the center, and mission then should drive things that you're doing. So it should drive your selection criteria. If part of your mission is to produce clinical researchers, and that's a big part of what you do, then it would make sense that is an experience that you'd be looking for in an applicant is research experience, right? So there's a couple things. So mission drives it, and then it's balanced consideration of an applicant's experiences, attributes, and metrics, which typically are MCAT and GPA, maybe individual grades. So it's the balanced consideration of those three, because as we know, traditionally and still in many medical school admissions processes, metrics are tipping the scale. They're prioritized higher, they're more important, or they're weighted higher. And so holistic review tries to say, let's balance that with an experience and attributes, because an applicant is not all their MCAT score doesn't tell you who they are as a person. It doesn't tell you anything about their experiences or what they learned from them. And those are equally important to helping you meet your mission or to serving people. Mm-hmm. And so ideally you would balance those three, and ideally you would do that balanced consideration all the way from the beginning when you're screening applicants to interview, because the most narrowing of the applicant pool happens when you're selecting your interview pool, because you have this large, especially at many medical schools. Like, imagine you're all, I don't know, I'm guessing you probably get 10,000 plus applications.
We're at 7,800, but who's counting?
Well, 7,800 applications, right? You're not interviewing even, half of those.
Yeah, we can't. We don't know spots for that.
No, you can't. Yeah, you're interviewing probably less than 1,000 or around there, and so think about that, 7,800 to 1,000. That's a huge narrowing of that funnel, and so many medical schools may be using metrics then because they have to narrow that pool down somehow. And then incorporate kind of this more balanced consideration after that. Ideally, though, in holistic review, you would not be narrowing by one of those factors. So you wouldn't be narrowing by metrics only. You would be truly doing that balanced consideration when you're narrowing down that pool. So I'll tell you in our process, because we're so Washington focused, which means we don't have this huge AMCAS applicant pool because people recognize for the most part that we're looking for Washingtonians or people that have connections to the states. And then we have these other criteria. And so it keeps our applicant pool down. So we're not accepting people from New York City who have zero ties to the states as a non-resident seat. Like we don't have like 5 of our seats that are for non-residents, like many medical schools operate under. When you even have 5 of your seats out of 80 that are open to totally non-residents, it will balloon your applicant pool. Yeah. But because we don't do that, it keeps our applicant pool in a reasonable level. And then when we're looking, we can then apply these thoughtful, although I think the way we do things in terms of establishing these threshold combinations of metrics, it can be done at any medical school, even one that has, 7,800 in the pool. Because then you blind it. But the important thing is that I think that you don't then weight it,
after
heavier
that point,
from
right?
venom. Yeah, exactly. So it's the balanced consideration from the very beginning, ideally, all the way through the process. And the other part of it is that you develop a structured rubrics that every person that touches the application, whether it's in a screening role or an interview role or in the final kind of decision making, that you have defined rubrics and you are using them consistently across people that are evaluating the application. Okay, so if you have defined rubrics and you have defined, an MMI is a very highly structured interview modality, so that's a very structured model. And everybody's trained on these rubrics, so hopefully then everybody's evaluating consistently across the pool. All of those things are important in holistic review because everybody then is on the same page and people aren't just randomly getting to ask different things about, the applicant. So like unstructured interviews, for example, where an interviewer can just sit there for 30 minutes and ask whatever they want. And there's no defined scoring system. And they just say, yes, we should admit this one, or no, we shouldn't. Is not really helpful. And there's a lot of research literature that shares that that's not a helpful approach, right? Yeah. The other thing that's really important if any schools are utilizing unstructured processes is that allows for even greater introduction of bias into the process. Yep. So the more structured, we can never rid ourselves of bias. I mean, we're just biased beings. So that's, now you can make effort toward trying to keep that under control. But the more structured that your process is or that your evaluation system is, the better it is at helping to stave off bias. And
how the applicant experience is more even than across
right.
Yeah,
you can expect that your application will go through the same and be evaluated through the same process or same rubrics as any other applicant. And so that's kind of part of it. So I think when I talk to other programs, like I even have worked with nursing admissions committees and others, and they're trying to do something similar. I'm like, first of all, you have to determine what's your mission. Determine how do you evaluate that? What would you be looking for in an applicant to tell you that you think that these qualities or experiences would help you select people that would help you do, complete your mission? Come up with an evaluation tool that is structured, that you're training all your users on, and that you are ensuring that all your applicants are going through the exact same process, and that you're balancing the metrics with experiences and attributes. And that's probably the hardest thing in holistic review for faculty, for admissions committees to think about. And honestly, that's why I think one of the reasons I think we're able to do it the way we do, where we blind metrics all the way through, is because we started that way. We didn't have to change faculty mind. Now, we did have people, our faculty in the admissions committee, who have been part of other admissions committees. But essentially, it's like, this is the way we do things. This is why we do it. This is why it's important. If you provide them with data that supports it, then faculty are likely, more likely to buy in.
Right.
They need to know that the metrics thresholds that you set up from the very beginning, that a huge set of national data tells you that those students are successful, then they're more likely to say, okay, I'm willing to accept that here.
I bet you heard some of that when you were visiting other admissions committees and you're walking through this change that, well, we want the best and brightest here at our institution. Yeah. And that's based on MCAT score, right?
Right.
Like, what if we, so
here's the thing.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with that is I tell them that there is actually research literature that also shows that there is no relationship between MCAT and GPA. So not every study that's out there supports that there's a relationship between the two. Or I'm sorry, MCAT and USMLE Step 1, for example. There are studies that show that there's either a weak or no relationship between the two. And also that there's very little, can't even think of in my mind right now, any evidence out there that has a relationship between MCAT and GPA and how students do in the clinical year. MMI though does. MMI has research findings that show that it has a relationship with how students perform in the third year, which MCAT and GPA are not telling us. So not only that, but you could have somebody with high metrics that don't have good communication skills. Is that kind of doctor you want to train? Being in a medical school like we are now with Washington State, we truly are about the community. The community expects us to serve them. We said, this is what we're going to do for you. This is what we want to aim for. So the community doesn't care about us being on US News and World Report or having whatever average MCAT. They care that we are training physicians that will serve their communities. And so it really kind of comes down to, what you're, I don't know what you're able to do and what context you sit within. So I think for applicants to understand that it's not a straightforward situation for many medical schools.
Yeah. I'm glad we talked about this just to kind of give some context to what holistic review looks like and how it affects submissions committees and how they have to try to incorporate it or how they're kind of wrapping their arms around it at each individual place. Like you said, you see one admissions committee process, you've seen one. Because everybody's different. I think to kind of start to wind things down here, Dr. Harrison, I like to ask just to kind of the final grand finale, what recommendations do you have for listeners as far as books that you like to read or recommend to people or blogs or other podcasts or things that you'd like me to share with them?
Sure. So I was thinking through this, and I don't necessarily have specific titles or anything like that. But what I will say, what I would highly encourage, because often a lot of pre-meds are out there reading the science textbooks. Some are, reading even USMLE books and MCAT books and all kinds of, things like that. That's not everything, right? So a couple of things that I thought about is reading growth mindset, books on growth mindset. So Carol Dweck is an author and a researcher on growth mindset. I think is important how, medicine is about lifelong learning. How can they be self-regulated learners? How can they have a frame of mind, even in their everyday experiences where they're open to experiences, they're open to growth versus defensiveness and closed off. So growth mindset would be one. I would say emotional intelligence. We need more physicians who are attuned to their social world, attuned to their patients, nonverbal cues, and so on. So I would say books on emotional intelligence, and then not just kind of in your head reading in that, but reflecting on how can I do this better? How can I grow in this area? I would say books on leadership. And not just leadership, but also management. How can you be both a good leader and a good manager? What are skills associated with that? And then hopefully that will help them think of skills. I would read articles and books on imposter syndrome.
That's come up before. Yep.
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of situations that no matter what background an applicant comes from, but most definitely, I think for applicants that come from like first generation, low socioeconomic rural backgrounds, that they're going to experience in their medical education journey these times when they're like don't feel like they belong, they don't feel like they're worthy, and that's all part of imposter syndrome. So being able to recognize that and then being able to combat it, like nope. I belong here. I was chosen to be here. I deserve this, and help them not be totally overwhelmed or captured by what, the negativity of imposter syndrome. So that'd be another one. And then I think a final thing I think about is just wellness. So when I talk to pre-meds a lot, I talk to them about, decision making and taking care of themselves and developing positive and healthy coping mechanisms for stress. If they aren't doing that before they get into med school, or they're trying to develop a healthy coping mechanism while they're in the middle of stress in med school, it's going to be harder to do that. Mm-hmm. So start before you get into med school. If right now if your coping mechanism for stress is to binge drink or to not sleep or whatever the case is that's unhealthy, mm-hmm. if you don't get that under control, that is going to be the way you cope with stress in medical school and through your medical journey, education journey, and it's not good, right? Yeah. So I think just developing healthy coping mechanisms, putting them into practice, getting them to where it is part of your behavior when you encounter stress, because that's going to be really important in medical school.
Excellent recommendations. I will put notes. I'll put tags on these in the show notes so people can go and then come back and look at them a little bit more closely. Dr. Harrison, this has been a wonderful conversation. I am so lucky to have the time that you've shared with us. The information you've been giving us, it just backs up just a lot of the themes we've been hearing along the way, along with some new things that I'm really glad that you emphasized. So I'm very grateful for all your time today. Thank you.
Oh, I'm grateful too. I so appreciate the time, and this is so important what you're doing, and exciting to help all these aspiring doctors out there.
Oh, well, great. Hey, listen, I look forward to seeing you in person at a future conference or something. I can't wait to come up and thank you in person. So thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. I would love it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. See you later.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.